Oh, hey, what's going on, Archons? Welcome to another episode of KeyThoughts, my weekly vlog on my musings on the great game of KeyForge. Got a really interesting episode today. Gonna share with you my thoughts about a topic that I think is very interesting. I think it's one of the most interesting things, or I don't know if it's a thing. It's interesting moments in a game of KeyForge that happens more than once, believe it or not. And we're going to start off with a card of the week. And of course, as I'm plugging on every YouTube, I don't want anyone to miss out on this who's interested. We got cheap KeyForge decks for sale. And I mean sealed decks that you can bring to tournaments, what have you, crack for your own pleasure, whatever you need. I got a hookup for them. They got Mass Mutation and Worlds Collide available. Mass Mutation is a French for cheaper, and we got English as well. Unfortunately, we don't have any displays left, but we're doing 12 deck bundles being sold out of 2-player starters, mainly just to save for you on shipping. If you don't feel comfortable decks being pulled from 2-player starters, still sealed in a deck box, they look like any deck you would pull from a thing such as this. That's what it basically looks like, but it's going to be Mass Mutation. It's just a deck from a 2-player starter. Looks like this. And yeah, that's how we're getting them. We put them all in a box and ship them to you. So it's like they've been taken out of a display, basically, is what they kind of look like. They have not been tampered with in any way. But if you are concerned about that for some reason, I mean, the store I'm getting them from, there's no one on staff who plays KeyForge really at all. So you can basically get that through me. Just send me an email or hit me up on Discord. There's notes. There is contact info for me in the notes to get your hands on that. We also got Worlds Collide actual displays, fully sealed, available as well. Hit me up for prices and stuff on that, but it's a fantastic deal, and stock is starting to get low. So if you have not jumped on this yet and it's something you're interested in, like, please don't hesitate, because this will run out probably within the next week. I think that's moving real fast. But without further ado, let's get on to the card of the week. And this week we have Trial by Water is the card of the week. And for those of you who don't know, it is a Sanctum action that states, reset the tide. Until the start of your next turn, players cannot raise the tide. Folks, this card is annoying AF, okay? I had this card used against me in a game, and I just gotta say, it's really potent. I think it works the best actually against Untamed, because Untamed has that really strong burst where Chelonia can come into play where the tide is high. It has some other cards where if they already have the tide, they can get more Æmber as a result. So I think it has a really strong effect against the Untamed suite in Dark Tidings. I think it also works really strongly against the folks in why can't I think right now, Sanctum for certain cards, as well as Unfathomable really uses the tide, of course. So it's a really great way to allow yourself to have that moment where they can't necessarily use a turn to do that, and they're going to lose the effects of the tide being in your opponent's favor. I guess Star Alliance uses it quite a bit too for certain things. So yeah, really versatile card for stymieing your opponent's plays. Really great disruption. I like it quite a bit. And you can even use it on your turn, so it's the last thing you do, so you get the tide throughout your whole turn, then you reset it. Fantastic. I'm loving that card right now. I think it can put in a lot of work, and it's a little bit underrated. Well, maybe because it's rare, you don't see it as much, but it's a fantastic card. Highly enjoy it. And let's go on to this week's topic, which is 5 Æmber. That's correct. I'm talking about the position in the game when you or your opponent is at 5 Æmber. I'm going to talk it as I am the player and my opponent has 5 Æmber, and the decisions I will make in that moment. So sometimes you have cards in your hand which are Æmber control, and sometimes certain Æmber control, I think, should not necessarily be utilized when your opponent is not in check. So if your opponent does moves that ensure they just get into check, I think that is when cards that do Æmber control are in their most potent state. Now, if you have an abundance of these Æmber control cards and you're just constantly trying to keep your opponent down so they can't advance forward, that's a whole nother game. But when you're on the moment that your opponent has 5 Æmber and you realize that your opponent is not in check, so you do not need to use Æmber control this turn, Sometimes the better decision space is to actually go with a house that allows you to really play a ton of cards from your hand, do things where you know that house does not have the Ember control. Because if you go with the house that does have a little bit of Ember control and you only take them off like 1 or 2, then they could possibly just go right back into check so easily, in which case that might have been a waste. And this allows you to not then cycle into more cards of the other house you had in your hand, in which case you know there is not a ton of Ember control, which when they do go into check, you're kind of hosed. So I like it for that standpoint where it buys a turn, because that means it's going to take them one more turn to forge a key either way, and you just allow yourself to advance your own game and hopefully get closer to you pacing the game in your favor to win. So I find that 5 Ember is just more interesting. Decisions can be made at that point within the game. I just think it's really interesting. I'm really fascinated by it and the things that can happen during that time. It really could mean as well that you actually maybe don't play the most cards out of your hand if you hold some of your Ember control. That's really potent. Earlier on in the game, there are obviously things like Too Much to Protect, Doorstep to Heaven, all those scaling Ember control, where the more Ember your opponent has, the more of an impact it will have on the effect of the card. So those are also ways where sometimes being on 5 Ember, you don't necessarily want to go into that house yet, especially if you haven't drawn it and you think there's a good chance you could, based on what's been played, what your draw is at, and the house distribution of cards played. Like, you may be getting into a bunch of cards from the house that hold those cards. So I really enjoy being in a position where your opponent has 5 Ember and you got to make decisions based on that, because I just think there's really cool plays that can be made, and sometimes the obvious play is not the one you should be going with. You should actually go with maybe something that could be less optimal for various reasons. Like I said, getting more Ember control into your hand to help stymie your opponent getting a key. So that's going to do it for this episode. A bit of a shorter one, but I really like this topic, and I want to know your thoughts on the 5 Ember point in a game, because I think it's just such a unique point. There's so many great decisions to be had there than when your opponent's on 0 Ember. Like, you obviously don't care as much about what your opponent's doing when they have 0 Ember as when they have 5 Ember and are at that point where they're not quite in check, but you know they could do a few things like potentially even burst really high. That's another thing, actually, now I think about it, is if they have a strong board and they're on 5 Ember, sometimes the play is to actually go into a house that can really deal with the board, so that way they can't reap out the following turn and go like way past check. So just a couple fun things to consider, and as I said, I'd love to hear your thoughts on the idea of opponent having 5 Ember and not in check, but going to be threatening for sure next turn. So please comment below and let me know your thoughts on this, as well as hit me up if you would like to get some cheap Mass Mutation or Worlds Collide product. And as always, folks, may your Ember never be stolen and your keys forged promptly. Have a good one.